So dear friends, organisms that exhibit sexual mode of reproduction belong to different kingdoms. So those organisms that carry out sexual reproduction are seen in kingdom fungi, plantae and animalia. In spite of their diversity in terms of their morphology, anatomy and physiology, that is, if you compare the fungi, plantae and animalia, all these three are different groups. They are different in terms of their morphology, their tissue structure, that is anatomy, and their physiology, their internal metabolism. So in spite of all these diversity, all these differences, still the mode of sexual reproduction exhibits a similar pattern in all these three different kingdoms. So what we should understand here is sexual reproduction is exhibited in kingdoms fungi, plantae and animalia. All these three are three different groups. They are very much different in terms of their morphology, anatomy and physiology, but still all these three they exhibit a common pattern when they go for sexual reproduction. Let us see what is that common pattern. In all sexually reproducing organisms, we have three phases in their lifespan. All the sexually reproducing organisms have three stages in their lifespan, right from birth to death. What are those three phases? Number 1, the juvenile phase or the vegetative phase. Number 2, the reproductive phase, and number 3, the senescence phase. Now let us see about each phase in detail. So right from the birth, immediately after the birth of an organism, the organism enters the juvenile phase. In animals we call it as a juvenile phase, and in plants we call it as a vegetative phase, right? So immediately after the birth of an organism, the organism enters into which phase? It is the juvenile phase or the vegetative phase. So until when this vegetative phase takes place? Until it goes for sexual maturity. So this phase is variable duration in different organisms. Juvenile phase is nothing but immediately after the birth until it reaches to the sexual maturity. That is the juvenile phase or the vegetative phase. So how long does this vegetative phase last? This phase, it is having variable durations in different organisms. That means in dog it is different, in cat it is different, in a human the juvenile phase is different, like that. Now coming to the second phase, that is the reproductive phase. Reproductive phase is, onset of reproductive phase is the end of the juvenile phase. So as you can see, as soon as the organism reaches to sexual maturity, that is the end of the juvenile phase and the start of the reproductive phase. In plants, the onset of reproductive phase is very clearly seen with the onset of flowering. So we all should understand that whenever a plant starts flowering, that means the reproductive phase has begun in that particular plant. Whereas in animals, the reproductive phase shows some kind of complex changes. Especially in placental mammals, we can see cyclic changes in the hormones and in its ovaries and the accessory ducts of the females. So dear friends, in plants the reproductive phase is clearly evident when a plant starts its flowering for the first time. Whereas in animals, especially in placental mammals, the reproductive phase is evident and cyclic changes takes place in the female placental mammals. What kind of cyclic changes? In terms of their hormones, their ovaries and their accessory ducts, right? Now, senescence phase. Senescence phase is the phase during which the organism stops its reproduction. That means the reproductive behavior of the organism will end, and that is the beginning of the senescence phase. Senescence phase is one of the parameters for onset of old age. That means when an organism stops its reproduction or its reproductive cycle, that is the beginning to old age. And during the aging process, there are so many changes taking place in your body. Metabolism slows down, and eventually senescence phase leads to old age. Old age will even lead to death of the organism, right? So, for this matter, the kind of changes that takes place during senescence phase are quite complex. Lot of changes takes place in your body, and the metabolism will slow down, body repair mechanism will be diminished, and the body's protein making capacity is also diminished, and as a result you can see lot of changes in the body, and the metabolic process, the rate at which digestion takes place, everything will be reduced, and this old age will eventually lead to death of the organism.